It is 5 minutes to 3. Let's talk about the story that I mentioned a little bit earlier, which is that officials at SeaWorld centres in the US have hit back at a film that has asked serious questions about the mental state of killer whales once they've been held in captivity. And the film is called Blackfish, and it was made after a trainer died when a whale called Tilikum dragged her underwater by her hair. Dawn Branchow was killed at SeaWorld in Orlando in 2010. Sam Berg is a former captive dolphin trainer at SeaWorld in Orlando and appears in the documentary. Jason Kelly also worked at SeaWorld in Orlando as a killer whale behavioural research intern, a conservation educator and a tour guide there as well. Welcome to both of you. Sam, you left SeaWorld, you took part in this critical documentary, despite having had this job as a trainer. What made you change your mind about SeaWorld and the idea of keeping these whales in captivity?
Well, hi, thanks for having me. It's great to be on the show. And the big thing that changed for me, honestly, I was an animal science major as an undergrad, so when I started working at SeaWorld, I had a really utilitarian approach to working with animals. I thought I was going to be a veterinarian, and so I only had ever really encountered captive animals, domestic animals like, cows and horses. And so when I went to work at SeaWorld, it didn't strike me that anything was particularly wrong with the whole idea of captivity in general. I saw some things for sure about the care of the animals that I questioned whether or not the enclosures were appropriate, but ultimately when I left, it wasn't because I was questioning captivity on the whole. It was because I thought I could go get a better degree and come back and make the animals' lives better from within the paradigm. It was the moment actually that Dawn Branchow was killed, and I saw the photos of her plastered all over the internet and on CNN, and I heard what the company was saying about her death, and I knew that it wasn't true, and that's kind of what woke me up and started me thinking about whether or not captivity is okay for killer whales.
Is your view that she died because the whale was kept in captivity? In other words, the captivity affected his mental state or made it angry? Were the two things related?
Yeah, I see Dawn's death as sort of it's like a 20-year train wreck. Starting with the decision to capture a male killer whale from his mother. Male killer whales spend about 70% of their lives within a couple of body lengths of their mothers. And killer whale societies are matriarchal, so when Tilikum was taken from his mom, he basically became the subdominant animal wherever he ended up. So he was relentlessly beaten up by the other animals in Canada, where he killed the first trainer in '91, and then at SeaWorld of Orlando, where he was moved to after he killed the first trainer in '92, and he's always been subdominant. He's such a huge animal. He's 12,000 pounds and 22 feet long. He's like the size of a school bus, and only 2 of the pools at Shamu Stadium are deeper than he is long. So it's a very tiny space for a large animal. And in the wild, male killer whales actually do something. They go away from the pods temporarily, and they kind of get out their aggression, sort of like Fight Club, and then they come back and they're babysitters for the animals in the pods. So it's not that they're naturally aggressive, but they need to have a way to get this, aggression and frustration out. And in captivity, they don't really have the ability to do that.
Jason Kelly, welcome to you. You also worked at SeaWorld, as I said there. You worked as a tour guide at SeaWorld and also as a behavioural research intern for killer whales there. Do you agree that essentially the containers that they're kept in are not big enough?
I don't necessarily agree with that. My main issue with the film, though, is, everyone's entitled to their own opinion. The issue is that the film was very much biased, and as not just someone who worked in the marine mammal field, but also someone who has a journalist background, I felt like I had an obligation to call out CNN for breaching journalism ethics.
Hang on. Why breaching journalism ethics?
Well, because at least in the United States, we follow a code of ethics under the Society of Professional Journalists. We're supposed to seek truth and, only report truth, minimize harm, act independently, be accountable.
Yeah, but you got Jason. With respect, truth is essentially indefinable. You can't say exactly and specifically what the truth is. And I think you also mentioned there that this film wasn't very balanced. I mean, that is the job of some documentaries, isn't it? That is when Michael Moore makes his documentaries. At election time, you'll get these films coming out telling you that Obama is terrible, and then another one will come out and tell you he was great. I interviewed someone the other day who's produced a film about drones that are used in Afghanistan. Sometimes a film has its purpose is to have a point of view, to tell you something. So for some of them, the purpose is, if you like, not to be balanced.
And that's fine, but once you put the CNN logo on it, that makes it a journalistic piece. And if you don't consider it to be part of CNN's views, then you have to put a disclaimer on that film saying this is an opinion piece, that the director is, vocally against killer whales in captivity. captivity, and that's fine to have that opinion, but you must not braid fact with fiction. You have to report the truth.
But
can I speak to that? I have SeaWorld was invited to participate in this film from day one. And in fact, Gabriella Cowperthwaite, I know her, and she was not anti-captivity when she started making this film. She wanted to make a film about the relationship between Dawn and Tillicum and why, and a woman who had a relationship with this animal for 14 years, why the animal might turn on her and kill her. And it was only through, a 2.5-year process of looking into the situation that these animals were in that she began to form an opinion that, captivity is not right. But they did approach SeaWorld many times and asked them to participate. And then SeaWorld, of course, after the film came out, they said that it was biased and that they weren't invited, and that their opinion wasn't represented. But they were given every opportunity to respond in the film, and they never did. They even sent questions multiple times to the head of the company and asked them to please respond, and they never did.
Just a reminder, Dawn is the trainer that was killed, Tillicum, the name of the whale that killed her. Jason, I realise that a lot of good work can be done. A lot of research goes on at places like SeaWorld. It's the same with zoos as well. I'm a member of London Zoo, and I know they do a lot of brilliant conservation work. But you have to say, if you just go on instinct alone, a killer whale used to the open sea, kept in a container that is only twice as deep as the whale is tall, Jason, it doesn't sound right.
Yeah, and that's fine to have an opinion, but you have to represent both sides. And as Sam said earlier, SeaWorld did decline to be part of the film, but when you have a director who's completely opposed to captivity, how do you know your side is not going to be taken out of context, as it was throughout the film? As I said earlier, it grades fact with fiction throughout the film, so certain parts are true. As someone who's both a journalist and who has spent time with SeaWorld, there are certain things that are true, certain things that are untrue.
Would the whale be happier in the open sea?
Well, most of these whales, 80% of the killer whales are born right there at SeaWorld, so they don't know anything different. It's like my dog here at home, Toby. He's a beagle. If I threw him out in the forest right next to my house, that's what a lot of these people who are opposed to SeaWorld are arguing, is that we just release into the ocean. They've been born there. They don't know how to survive out in the wild. That would be cruel.
I'd like to speak to the captive breeding program, what he's referring to, because one of the things that SeaWorld accused the film of was accusing, that SeaWorld said that Blackfish accused SeaWorld of still collecting animals from the wild. And in fact, what the film accused SeaWorld of was breeding an animal who's responsible for the death of 3 people. And yes, SeaWorld has a very effective captive breeding program. 54% of the animals in SeaWorld's collection are actually related to an animal that killed 3 people, which, that to me is unconscionable. But then if you want to talk about the captive breeding program, nobody that I'm affiliated with wants to just throw these captive borns or the wild-caught animals back out into the wild. The best...
What do you want?
Oh, well, I would like to just see SeaWorld change its business model. If we can just stop exploiting these animals for entertainment. And
how do you, if you don't want them to be put back in the wild, you don't want them to be used for entertainment, what do you do with them?
There's a lot of different options. One option is what's called an ocean sanctuary, where you actually look for a cove that's suitable that you can actually put a net across, and these animals can be taken care of. There's some animals, like Tillicum is a perfect example. He's broken his teeth from chewing on the steel bars that are on the gates that separate the pools, and so he needs to have his teeth flushed with betadine 3 times a day just to keep from food getting stuck in there and him getting infections. So he's not really you couldn't really put him back out in the wild, and plus he's killed 3 people. But there are other animals that are healthier and could be taken care of in a more natural setting where they're not forced to perform every day for fish. Because basically SeaWorld whales they're forced to perform 365 days a year for food. And retirement for these guys is death. They perform every day until they die. So to put them in a more natural setting and allow them to experience the natural rhythms of the ocean, to hear all the different sounds and not be in a concrete and glass and steel enclosure for the rest of their lives, that would be fine. And SeaWorld's a $2.2 billion business, so I don't think that they're going anywhere. I don't want to see them close, but I want to see them do the right thing and stop the animal entertainment side of their business. They can do great education if they want to. They do great work with manatees and sea turtles. They do rehab those animals, but they've never rehabbed a bottlenose dolphin or a killer whale and put them back in the wild. So they're not doing actual conservation work for those animals. So I think it's time. It's 2013. They can change their business model and be a real educational facility.
Is it so bad if you make an animal perform for entertainment?
Yes, it is.
What's racing? What's horse racing?
Well, as an animal science major and a pre-veterinary major, I could definitely speak to the horse. Horses are often, especially thoroughbred horses, are constantly on the edge of getting sick. They're being pumped up with all sorts of medications. The veterinary care that they get is all just
worse
to keep
than that.
them going.
We kill millions of animals a week around the world to eat.
Right, that's true. I mean, if we want to get into the whole concept of animal abuse, there are way worse cases of animal abuse out there for sure, but this is a particular situation where I think people believe when they go to SeaWorld that they're actually doing something good for the environment.
We need to hear from SeaWorld. Hang on a sec, Jason. We invited a representative from SeaWorld to come on to the programme. They declined, but instead they reissued this statement.
Blackfish is billed as a documentary, but instead of a fair and balanced treatment of a complex subject, the film is inaccurate and misleading, and regrettably exploits a tragedy that remains a source of deep pain for Dawn Brancheau's family, friends and colleagues. To promote its bias that killer whales should not be maintained in a zoological setting, the film paints a distorted picture that withholds from viewers key facts about SeaWorld. Among them, that SeaWorld is one of the world's most respected zoological institutions, that SeaWorld rescues, rehabilitates and returns to the wild hundreds of wild animals every year, and that SeaWorld commits millions of dollars annually to conservation and scientific research. Perhaps most important, the film fails to mention SeaWorld's commitment to the safety of its team members and guests, and to the care and welfare of its animals, as demonstrated by the company's continual refinement and improvement to its killer whale facilities, equipment and procedures, both before and after the death of Dawn Brancheau.
And that is the statement from SeaWorld putting their side. We have to leave it there. Sam Berg, thank you to you, a former trainer at SeaWorld who left and is now critical of SeaWorld. As you heard, she appears in this documentary that a lot of people are talking about. And Jason Kelly worked at SeaWorld, was defending SeaWorld, as you heard. This film, this documentary that's generating all this heat is called Blackfish. It's called Blackfish if you want to look out for it.